Good afternoon. My name is Andres Beques, and today I will talk to you about poverty, a problem which is quite relevant in our world and which billions of people suffer through every day. To help us talk about this topic, we've got some bullet points that will guide us, as in what is poverty, the statistics, all around the world and even in Mexico, the causes and consequences of poverty, the harmful stereotypes, and the experiences that poor people go through. So first, what is poverty? Poverty it's like a condition that most people don't deserve to go through. It's a daily struggle of picking between one thing or another without wanting to. Picking between food and health. Will I buy this that is more cheap or this that can actually feed my whole family? It's a daily struggle that much families or individuals go through. Poverty is a very complex issue. Situated in oppression and systems that don't normally give access to the people to basic resources, and that holds them back from development. So basically, poverty it's a state, it's a form of life that you don't want to suffer with. It's more than just a lack of income. It's a condition in which people or communities lack the financial resources and other essentials for a minimum standard of living. People and families that will often go through poverty can't even go without proper housing, clean water, healthy food. Of course, every nation has its own criteria of what is poverty, but at the same time, it is basically the same for all of us. It's suffering. Also, governments usually put social welfare programs to help these families and people that struggle through this state of living. Every state, even of the United States, for example, has its own ways of managing it and providing for the individuals in need. Or even in Europe, they have much more drastic actions to take in this situation. But at the same time, it still remains as a pungent problem in all around the globe, and that needs to be seeked out. Now we move on to statistics. Global poverty data is more or less compiled by national surveys that are held in different households of different countries. Obviously, these surveys will have results that vary between countries or over time, and this helps get a better look at the comparison in which what country is considered poor by their money standards, if we could say it like that. More or less, most of the time they use poverty lines, that is the limit between not being poor and well-being on what the country considers a state of poverty. It's more or less like how much income do you have per day. So this is a study from 2017, and the poverty lines here are an approximation that are national definitions of poverty. So for instance, while a person in the United States is counted as being in poverty if they live on less than roughly $25 a day, in Ethiopia, the poverty line is set more than 10 times lower at $2.4 a day. As we can see here, Bangladesh has the poverty line in $2.57, and more than 24% of their population is beneath this poverty line, or will live in poverty. Obviously, these stats can vary between years, between countries. So the goal of the international poverty line is $2.15 per day. This would be better for the state of the world and improve on the poverty situation. But from around 2013, the progress in reducing global poverty started to slow. So today, about 1 in 10 people are still in extreme poverty, deprived of basic human resources. And well, the progress has been impeded in different ways, as for the pandemic, for an economic growth, or fragility of basically every enterprise known to this world. Now, if we're talking about Mexico stats, they actually had some improvements. In 2016, they had roughly 52.2 million people living in a state of poverty. 6 years later, in 2022, they had a decrease to 46.8 million people living in poverty. In general percentages, it was a decrease. They had 43.2% of people living in poverty to 36.3% living in poverty. Now, in the long term, or in extreme poverty, it was an increase from 8.8 million people living in extreme poverty in 2016 to 9.1 million people living in extreme poverty in 2022. This was basically from 7.1% to 7.2% of the population in Mexico. Now, between 2018 and 2022, there have been significant advances in poverty reduction, most of all in Baja California, the state of Colima, Sinaloa, and Chihuahua. These stand out because they were allowed to improve more than the national average, and they could position themselves in our country as the 7 entities with the lowest levels of poverty. However, in 2022, 15 of the 32 states of Mexico had levels of extreme poverty higher than those in 2018. Now, for the causes of poverty, these are quite vital to the topic. We've got at least 8 important ones, or the most relevant. Conflict, which can be summed up to the wars, because wars have a lot of after effects that leave people homeless without a job, or even without some of their loved ones. Unemployment is a big one, because with no income, what do you do for yourself? How can you advance each day or get what you at least need to survive? Also, unstable economy is to blame, because in the present, with everyday higher prices or higher risks of even spending in anything, can be huge for some people that has little to no money and can only afford such basic things. But also, we've got basic resources, more as the unaccess to these basic resources. Sometimes the government put people in situations where they have little to no access to these vital things that people need to survive. Also, hunger is a big one, because without anything to eat, people basically do anything to just get a penny to even buy something for themselves, let alone their families. Inequality is a big factor also, because you can see a poor person in the streets or anywhere in the city, and maybe some people just don't even take them as people, they just take them as obstacles. And healthcare is also a big one. Healthcare is a not shady but difficult business or industry, and disables lots of people to access these health resources. Lots of people in poverty can't really attend a hospital or get the most vital medical services because they don't have healthcare, and healthcare doesn't help them. Now, onto the section of harmful stereotypes. How does society perceive or react to poverty or poor people? Well, oftenly not in a good way. Normally, poverty is commonly associated with people that are lazy, irresponsible, that are the opposite of hardworking, and that with the few money that they have, they waste on alcohol, drugs, or for other malicious reasons. Obviously, language counts too, and how they mostly disrespect the poor people that they have in front. But people often don't realize that it's not always about those simple or face value reasons that someone is in a situation of poverty. Some can even be born poor and not have a reason or how to even get out of that situation, you know? Poor people are often stereotyped as, well, less competent, less proactive, and less responsible. They may be seen as pleasant or hardworking, and this only leads to higher ups, well, condescending them to work for more hours and less pay. So these stereotypes and often offensive phrases, as in, like an example can be, the poor are poor because they want to, or because they don't work hard enough. Or these are embedded in culture and in the system, and this only reinforces the stigma, the discrimination that these people often have to struggle through every day. So for how society in general, the system reacts to poverty, those in power, like politicians or big media groups, often hold poverty in a negative light. They're the ones that stereotype poverty the most, and they tend to put it as an individual failing. You didn't work hard enough for what you need in life. You didn't do this to get more money or to basically survive. They frame it as something individual, as your failure against, well, a systemic problem, like a more broad problem in the system, an issue. So those in power often tend to maintain more of these offensive stereotypes and to marginalize, like segregate the poor, to turn them into somewhat of a minority, and they hide these, well, bad intentions with often social welfare that more than help people, they act more like a deterrent to accessing the necessary resources for survival for these poor people. Obviously, the stigma, the stereotypes act as a glue to hold poverty in place and to basically maintain people poor so they can seek help and maybe find jobs for which the high ups or the bosses of certain companies can take advantage of them. Last but not least, for the consequences. What do poor people suffer through regularly? What consequences do they go through? Well, we got the most important ones. Obviously, we have the shame of, well, being on the streets, not having what to eat, not having basic things that most of people around you have, and the stigmatization. This makes it even harder for poor people to get out of this situation. It's more hard to get to them to help them, and it requires more than just making services available. It's bringing it to them. It's showing them how to access them, but also, well, helping them get to them. Also, we've got the separation of children from their families or lack of civil registration. This obviously affects how they're gonna have basic services in life, as in education and healthcare, that are also pretty hard for poor people to access to. Obviously, only specific outreach can ensure the inclusion of all of these. And, well, the most effective policies today for poor people often are related with children, you know. And some other consequences can be the malnourishment, especially in children. It's very dangerous because it's basically not their fault of their suffering, or they have to eat food that is not very good or clean for them, or no food at all, and this affects their bodies in the very long term. This could also lead to shorter lifespans for equally children to adults, even mental health problems, and could lead to low resource and unsafe neighborhoods. Obviously, the government doesn't help much and gives, well, various maybe punishments or maybe more segregation to poor people, and that's why it's such a complex issue, because you just can't get out of it working harder or being lucky. There's a lot of things in play to basically resolve this problem, and that's why it's such an interesting topic and an important topic to talk about, because we can understand when we see a victim of poverty. So basically, that was my topic, and thank you very much.